Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are strapping on our virtual lab coats and preparing for a journey into one of the most technical and, let's be honest, mysterious realms of chemistry. The science of molecules that fundamentally alter human consciousness.
Our source material for this deep dive is absolutely formidable. We're translating and breaking down a highly technical German compendium called Psychedelische Chemie, which translates to psychedelic chemistry.
And this book is really something else. It's not just a list of chemicals.
Not at all. It's unique because it serves as this extensive bridge. On one side, you have the precise molecular structure, the complex synthesis pathways, the pharmacology, all the hard science. And then critically, it juxtaposes those facts against a whole library of detailed experiential accounts.
So you get the what and the so what.
Exactly. You get the molecular blueprint and the resulting subjective reality side by side.
And that's really the core of our mission today. For you, the curious learner, we need to take this rigorous, often incredibly impenetrable material. It really reads like a textbook on advanced organic chemistry, and translate it into clear, accessible, structured knowledge. We're going to trace the pathway from, say, a single atom being added to a molecule all the way to a massive hours-long shift in perception. We'll need to explore the foundational principles, specifically neurochemistry and the very weird world of stereochemistry, and then see what those subtle molecular changes actually mean for a personal experience using the notes in the text.
And it is essential, I think, before we even start, to establish the strict ethical framing of the source material itself. The author repeatedly and emphatically states that the book's goal is purely educational.
Right, general scientific education.
Yes, not promoting or encouraging illegal use. That's a critical distinction. It also warns very sternly that the chemical synthesis of these substances requires professional lab infrastructure and expertise, and that misuse carries severe risks, including permanent psychological harm.
So this isn't a how-to guide.
Absolutely not. The author even grounds the whole discussion in a moral imperative, quoting Francois Rabelais. Science without conscience can only end in the ruin of the soul.
That sets a crucial, serious boundary. We are here strictly to understand the science of these mechanisms. We're trying to demystify how these tiny molecular structures manage to interface with the brain, which is, the most complex organic structure known to us.
Precisely. And today we're focusing on answering that one fundamental question. How does a specific molecular architecture dictate a specific subjective experience? So we'll start by organizing this vast universe of substances, then dive into the structural principles, and finally we'll spend a good amount of time linking those structural tweaks to the neurological actions and, the resulting human experience.
So let's start with taxonomy. If you're a pharmacologist and you're faced with literally thousands of chemicals that affect the central nervous system, how do you even begin to sort them? The source outlines two main classification systems.
One is based on the effect, which is more intuitive for, say, a doctor or a user, and one is based on chemical structure, which is much more reliable for a chemist.
Okay, so let's start with the first one, the effect.
Right, so this approach focuses on the consumer or patient experience. The source refers to it as the RM-Julian system. It's useful, but it can be messy for chemists because a single molecule might fit into multiple categories depending on the dose.
So you start with what the source calls conventional substances. This would include things like hypnotics, your barbiturates, or benzodiazepines, which are mainly about inducing sleep or sedation.
Yes, by depressing central nervous system activity.
Yeah.
And in that same group, you have narcotics and anxiolytics like GABA agonists, which are all designed to reduce anxiety and create a state of relaxation.
Then you move into substances that more actively shift consciousness, the psychostimulants.
Right. Things like cocaine and amphetamines, they achieve their effects by messing with the reuptake mechanisms for neurotransmitters like dopamine and norepinephrine.
So they flood the system.
They flood the system, leading to heightened alertness, energy, euphoria. Then you have the antidepressants, which modify mood by targeting different systems, like MAO inhibition, or selectively blocking the reuptake of serotonin, the famous SSRIs.
But our core focus for this deep dive rests on the hallucinogens, and the source material is very rigorous in how it defines this category.
It is. A hallucinogen, in this strict sense, is a substance that causes genuine perception changes, auditory or visual, and the key part is that the user has an inability to clearly distinguish the altered perception from consensus reality.
So it's not just seeing wavy lines on the carpet.
No. It's experiencing a profound break from normal sensory input that feels to the user at that moment, completely real.
That distinction is key, but even within that hallucinogen category, the language needs to be more nuanced. The source details three really important terms. The first is the original one, psychedelica or psychedelics.
Coined by Humphrey Osmond back in the 1950s, the term literally means soul manifesting or consciousness expanding. These substances are fundamentally associated with generating deep imagery, complex fantasies, and really impacting thought patterns and emotions.
And this is where we get the terms open-eye visuals and closed-eye visuals.
Exactly, OEVs and CEVs. They're used to describe these complex visual distortions that often feel intensely personal or symbolic.
Okay, next are the entactogens. This term shifts the focus away from visuals and more toward emotional connection.
Yes, this was coined by David E. Nichols in 1986. It means inner touching.
Inner touching.
These substances promote feelings of empathy, self-knowledge, and social bonding. MDMA or ecstasy and MDA are the prime examples here. They stimulate that feeling of connection, and their mechanism, as we'll see, is distinctly different. It involves oxytocin release alongside serotonin.
And the final category is entheogens. This one seems more about context and origin.
It is. It refers primarily to substances from natural sources, usually plants, that have a history of use in religious, spiritual, or ceremonial rituals. It means awakening the divine within.
So this would be mescaline from the peyote cactus or psilocybin from mushrooms.
Correct. While they definitely cause strong psychedelic effects, the classification highlights their cultural and historical context. The source also reminds us of some older, less used terms like psychotomimetics, which means mimicking psychosis, or idea promoting, which just goes to show how hard it's always been to categorize these experiences.
Given all that ambiguity, it makes sense that the pharmaceutical world would lean on structural classification. The actual chemical backbone is a far more robust predictor of what a drug will do than trying to pin down a subjective feeling.
Absolutely. The chemical backbone defines how the molecule is going to interact with the body's hardware.
Yeah.
The source material really concentrates on three major structural classes that just dominate this whole world of consciousness alteration.
And first, which is the major focus for our deep dive, are the phenethylamines, or PEAs.
Yes. These compounds all share a common structural element, a simple benzene ring connected to an ethylamine group. It sounds simple, but that basic backbone allows for a tremendous number of substitutions. Amphetamine, mescaline, MDMA, they're all built on this core PEA structure.
Okay, second major class, the tryptamines.
These are structurally related to the neurotransmitter serotonin itself. They share something called an indole ring system. This class includes really powerful substances like DMT, psilocin, and 5-MeO-DMT.
And the third major class in the source material is the indoleocypropylamines, which is a mouthful.
It is. You could just think of them as the lysergamides like LSD and LSA. They're often structurally more complex with fused ring systems.
And the book gives a nod to others, right?
Right. It briefly acknowledges other classes that interface with the brain. The cannabinoids like THC and CBD, tropane derivatives like cocaine, pencyclidane derivatives like PCP and ketamine, and of course the opioids. But really, if we can get a solid grip on the PEA scaffold, we unlock the chemistry behind thousands of compounds, and that's our priority today.
Okay, so we're moving from taxonomy into the engine room. This is where we look at the mechanics. How does a molecule's two-dimensional structure, and I guess its three-dimensional shape, translate into a specific biological effect? This brings us to structure-activity relationships, SAR.
SAR is the rigorous field that defines that very relationship between a molecule's specific chemical characteristics and its biological effect. That includes its activity, its potency, the dosage you need. It's the ultimate molecular lock and key system.
So what are those characteristics? What makes a good key?
Well, it's highly comprehensive. It includes the molecule's constitution, so what atoms are in it, and its configuration and conformation, which is its precise 3D shape. But there are two factors that are just incredibly crucial for psychoactive drugs.
Which are?
First, that exact 3D spatial arrangement, which we'll get into as stereochemistry, and second, its polarity or lipophilicity. This is huge.
Lipophilicity meaning fat solubility.
Exactly. A polar or water-soluble molecule really struggles to get into the brain. You have to think of the brain as this massive, fatty oil slick wrapped in a protective barrier. A molecule needs to be oily enough, lipophilic enough, to sneak through that fatty barrier and reach its receptors.
So its oiliness directly impacts the drug's journey through the body. This is pharmacokinetics.
Precisely. Pharmacokinetics describes the fate of a drug from the moment it enters the body until it leaves. It covers four major steps: absorption, getting into the blood, distribution, where it goes, especially crossing the blood-brain barrier, metabolism, how enzymes break it down, and excretion, how it's removed. A highly lipophilic drug will usually get into the brain faster and be metabolized quicker, which affects both how fast it hits you and how long it lasts.
And ultimately, the drug's whole purpose is to interact with a target, a receptor.
Right, a protein, a receptor, or a transporter. And we classify these interactions based on what the drug does.
So the two main modes of action are agonism and antagonism.
Correct. A drug is an agonist if it mimics the body's natural signaling molecule and activates the receptor. It's an antagonist if it just binds to the receptor without activating it, basically blocking the natural substance from getting in. Most of the psychoactive drugs we're talking about work through very specific agonism.
And all of this action is centered around the synapse, synaptic transmission. That's the language of the central nervous system.
That's where the magic happens. Neurons communicate chemically. An electrical signal arrives, the presynaptic neuron releases neurotransmitters into this tiny gap called the synaptic cleft. Those neurotransmitters float across and bind to receptors on the other side, causing either excitation, passing the signal on, or inhibition, dampening the signal. Psychoactive substances manipulate this whole process.
And once again, we come back to the gatekeepers, the blood-brain barrier, the neurological bouncer.
The BBB is absolutely critical. It's this specialized layer of capillaries that isolates the brain, keeping its internal chemical environment extremely stable. It aggressively filters out most water-soluble molecules and toxins. This is precisely why highly potent psychoactive substances, which are generally small, nonpolar, and highly lipophilic, are so effective they just slip right past the barrier.
Okay, so let's quickly review the native chemicals that these drugs are designed to interact with. Understanding their natural roles helps make sense of the artificial effects.
We can start with acetylcholine, or ATH. It's fundamental for muscle contraction and motor function. The source notes that disorders like Parkinson's tremors are linked to imbalances in this system. It's all about physical control.
Then we have the classic stress and alertness chemicals, adrenaline and noradrenaline.
The fight-or-flight hormones. They regulate heart rate, blood pressure, metabolism, vigilance. Noradrenaline, specifically in the brain, is huge for the reward system, hunger and thirst, and just general sympathetic nervous system activity. Alertness, energy. When a stimulant hits this system, you feel it physically, immediately.
And dopamine, DA, the NT of motivation and reward.
It's absolutely central to the brain's pleasure and reinforcement pathways, motor control, hormonal regulation. And Source points out this dramatic duality here. Not enough dopamine, and you get the movement difficulties of Parkinsonism. Too much, and it's strongly linked to symptoms of schizophrenia. It's all about a very delicate balance.
And then the big one for our topic, serotonin, or 5-HT. This is the main target for most of the classic psychedelics.
Serotonin is a master regulator. It's widespread throughout the gut and the central nervous system. Its functions are vast: sleep-wake cycles, appetite, emotional processing, mood, memory, even pain pathways.
But what's really interesting is how it interacts with the others.
Yes. When psychoactives influence serotonin, it rarely acts in isolation. The cascade of serotonin activity almost always causes downstream changes in the dopamine and noradrenaline systems. So the overall drug experience is a highly complex cocktail, not just a single note.
And we really have to elaborate on the key target receptor here, the 5-HT2A receptor. Why does activating that specific receptor cause such profound changes in our perception of reality?
Well, the 5-HT2A receptor is highly expressed in the cerebral cortex, especially in areas responsible for sensory processing and higher cognitive functions. When classical psychedelics, which are all 5-HT2A agonists, bind to it, they don't just mimic serotonin. They activate it in a very specific way that changes the feedback loops within the cortex.
So it's like it's scrambling the usual signals.
In a way, it's believed to disrupt the brain's default mode network, which is the system that keeps our perception stable and predictable. It basically tears down the filters. And that sudden influx of unfiltered cross-sensory data is what we experience as visual phenomena, synesthetic, and these profound conceptual shifts.
And just to round it out, GABA.
The CNS needs a break, and GABA is it. It's the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. It slows things down, and it's crucial for regulating anxiety and sleep.
Okay, let's dedicate proper time to a really critical and potentially very dangerous interaction, the monoamine oxidase enzyme, or MAO.
MAO is the metabolic housekeeping crew. It's an enzyme found all over the body, but especially in the liver and the gut, and its job is to break down amines. That includes all the major neurotransmitters we just discussed and nearly all the PEA-based psychoactives.
So if you take one of these substances orally, MAO is the first line of defense. It destroys it before it can even get into your bloodstream.
Exactly. which is where MAO inhibitors, or MAOs, come in. They block this crucial breakdown pathway. By stopping MAO from doing its job, the MAO allows the psychoactive substance to bypass that natural degradation and reach the brain in active concentrations.
But blocking that enzyme is inherently dangerous.
It carries severe, potentially lethal risks. The danger is the toxic accumulation of amines. If you combine an MAOI with anything rich in amines, that can be certain foods like aged cheese, prescription stimulants, or our PEA substances, the body just can't metabolize them.
And that leads to what?
A massive, unregulated buildup. This can cause hypertensive crises, stroke, or fatal cardiovascular events. The source issues an extremely strong warning about this. MAO should never be combined with common stimulants like amphetamines without explicit medical supervision.
It's a sobering warning, and yet the source details this incredible historical context for this exact interaction.
It's one of the great accidental pharmacological discoveries. Indigenous peoples, especially in South America, traditionally use natural MAOI compounds like harmine from the ayahuasca vine in combination with powerful psychoactives like DMT.
They figured it out empirically.
They figured it out empirically. With no knowledge of organic chemistry, they just knew that one plant was necessary to switch on the other when you drank it. It demonstrates this deep ancestral understanding of metabolic necessity.
Okay, so now we have to move down to the atomic level, where structure literally defines function. We're talking about stereochemistry, the study of the 3D arrangement of atoms. And you should care about this, even as a non-chemist, because two molecules can have the exact same chemical formula, yet one can be a medicine and the other can be a poison, simply because they're mirror images of each other.
And this concept is defined by chirality, which comes from the Greek word for hand. A molecule is chiral if it can't be superimposed on its mirror image. This usually happens when a carbon atom, the chiral center, is bonded to 4 different groups.
The classic illustration is your hands, right? Your left hand is the mirror image of your right, but you can never line them up perfectly, palm to palm, knuckle to knuckle.
Exactly. And that pair of non-superimposable mirror images are called enantiomers. In a regular test tube, they have identical properties, same melting point, same solubility. But they differ in 2 critical ways.
The first is optical activity.
Right. One enantiomer will rotate polarized light in one direction, which we call dextro, or plus. And its mirror image will rotate the light to the exact same degree, but in the opposite direction, levo, or minus.
And the second difference, which is the most important one for us, is that they interact differently with biological receptors. And the reason for that is because the receptors themselves are also chiral. They have a specific shape, like a left-handed glove.
Precisely. If the receptor is a left-handed glove, only the left-handed molecule will fit perfectly and trigger a response. The right-handed molecule might still bind, but it'll be a clumsy fit. It might be less potent or do nothing at all.
And this is so important because, as we noted, many street-synthesized drugs like MDMA or amphetamine are often produced as a racemate.
Which is a perfect one-to-one mixture of both enantiomers. So the user is often getting 2 separate drugs in one pill, each with a potentially different effect and potency.
Okay, so to get more specific than just plus or minus, chemists have another system.
Yes. To move beyond just light rotation, which doesn't really describe the physical arrangement, chemists use the KH-N-Ingold Prelog rules to define the molecule's absolute configuration.
So this is the formal chemical definition of the mirror image.
It is. It assigns priority rankings to the 4 groups around the chiral carbon. If the priority decreases in a clockwise direction, it's designated R for rectus, Latin for right.
Yeah.
If it decreases counterclockwise, it's designated S for sinister, Latin for left.
And this RS designation is what defines the physical shape. It is not the same as the plus-minus light rotation. That's a common point of confusion.
Very common. The RS definition is purely structural, and it's that RS configuration that the biological receptor sees when the molecule tries to bind.
So let's apply this. Let's look at our PEA family and see how this RS difference leads to radically different drug profiles.
Okay, first let's consider the classic psychedelic amphetamines, the 2C family, DOB, DOM. For these drugs, which are high-affinity 5-HT2A agonists, studies rigorously show that the R enantiomer is the dominant psychoactive form.
The R form.
The R form has a much higher affinity for that 5-HT2A receptor. It is the superior key for that psychedelic lock. So if you get a racemate of DOB, half of what you're taking is less potent or largely inactive in the way you want it to be.
And that other half, the S form, could just contribute to side effects.
It often does. It might not fit the 5-HT2A receptor well, but it might interact poorly with other receptors, increasing the body load without adding to the desired psychological effect.
But then the pattern completely flips for the stimulants and entactogens like methamphetamine, MDA, and MDMA.
It does. For those, the S enantiomer is the powerhouse. The S form is much more active in releasing monoamines, dopamine, and norepinephrine. S-methamphetamine, for example, is the potent central nervous system stimulant, the R enantiomer. It's used as a mild nasal decongestant.
That's incredible. The difference is literally just the direction the atoms are pointing.
It is. So when someone takes racemic MDMA, they're experiencing the powerful S form driving the euphoria combined with the R form, which often contributes more to the physical stimulation and maybe some of the anxiety.
This just shows that when we look at the structure of these PEAs, we're not looking at one drug. We're often looking at the potential for two separate concurrent drug actions.
And that phenethylamine scaffold is really the star of this deep dive. It's just astonishingly adaptable. Chemists can create thousands of derivatives simply by adding or moving small chemical groups.
Okay, so as a starting point, let's confirm. The unsubstituted PEA, the bare bones structure, it has no noticeable psychoactive effect, right?
Correct. It's a dud. It's too quickly metabolized by MAO. It can't navigate the BBB properly. It doesn't fit the receptors. It just doesn't work. The activity is entirely dependent on adding substituents to specific positions.
And where are the hotspots for these additions?
Activity is highly dependent on substitutions on the phenyl ring, especially at positions 2, 4, and 5, and also on the side chain, specifically the alpha carbon, which turns a phenethylamine into an amphetamine, or the nitrogen atom, which creates things like MDMA.
So a tiny change at just one of those spots, say the 4 position, can just drastically alter the potency and duration.
Absolutely. We can define entire classes by these substitutions. For example, the presence of the 3-vol-4 methylene-deoxy group, that's a little ring connecting positions 3 and 4, is the chemical fingerprint of almost all entactogens. MDMA, MDEA, MDA. That substitution seems to be critical for promoting serotonin release, and structurally, it's implicated in that downstream release of oxytocin that drives the empathy.
And what about the classical psychedelics, the ones that rely on 5-HT2A agonism?
They generally require the 2-val-5-dimethoxy substitution pattern. This means adding methoxy groups at positions 2 and 5 on the ring. This specific pattern is crucial for creating the perfect shape to fit and strongly activate the 5-HT2A and 5-HT2C receptors. If you move those methoxy groups, the activity often just plummets.
This allows us to summarize the 3 primary neuropharmacological families within the PEA scaffold, and it's all dictated by these little substitutions.
Exactly. Family 1, pure stimulants, amphetamine, methamphetamine. Their mechanism is almost exclusively focused on cranking up dopamine and norepinephrine. Massive excitation, very little in the way of visual alteration.
Family 2, entactogens, MDMA, MDEA. These are the 3.4 methylene-deoxy substituted ones.
Their profile is much more balanced. They do increase dopamine and norepinephrine, but they hit the serotonin system significantly harder. They are strong serotonin releasers, and the unique result is that emotional core of the experience, which is linked to that strong oxytocin release.
And finally, family 3, classic psychedelics. The 2CX family, mescaline, DOB, the 2,4-dimethoxy substituted PEAs.
And these substances move away from major monoamine release and focus instead on direct agonism at the 5-HT2A and 5-HT2C receptors. They mimic serotonin, they trigger the receptor directly, and that leads to the profound sensory and cognitive distortions, the hallucinations, without that same degree of emotional connection you see in the entactogens.
So we've built the chemical blueprints, we understand the locks and the keys. Now let's see what happens when we fire up the engine and read the trip reports from the source material.
This section ties everything together. We're going to explicitly connect the dry chemical facts, the specific substitutions, to the powerful subjective effects described by users. This juxtaposition is the most valuable part of the source.
Let's start with the 2CX series, defined by that 235-dimethoxy psychedelic backbone. The only difference between these compounds is what's attached at the 4 position on the ring.
We can start with 2CB, that's with the bromine atom at the 4 position. The source classifies it as both an aphrodisiacum and a psychedelicum. The dose is low, 5 to 25 milligrams orally, and the duration is moderate, about 4 to 8 hours.
Okay, and the source notes its high affinity for the 5-HT2A and 2C receptors. Experientially, it's known for being very tactile, euphoric, with strong sexual stimulation and sensory enhancement. The visuals are often described as clean, geometric, and brilliantly colorful.
The anecdotal reports really underscore this. One report details a 25 milligram experience where the user felt high communication, intensely enhanced senses, and saw ultraviolet points dancing in the dark. And importantly, the report notes that the experience felt controllable, with a relatively smooth, gentle return to baseline after 7 hours. That bromine atom seems to create a really nice balance.
Okay, now let's swap that bromine for a simple methyl group, and you get 2CD.
With 2CD, the dose rises significantly to 20 to 60 milligrams, and the duration is a little shorter, 4 to 6 hours.
Why the jump in dose?
It's likely because the smaller methyl group makes the molecule a bit less lipophilic, or maybe more prone to being broken down by enzymes compared to the bromo compound. At low doses, it produces mild, warm, and pathogenic effects, which fits the entactogen classification.
But at higher doses, it shifts firmly into the psychedelic realm. A 40 milligram report described a sudden wave of happiness and intense euphoria. But a report at 60 milligrams said the feeling was like an emotional roller coaster, with vivid visuals. So its classification really depends on how much you take.
Exactly. Okay, now let's substitute an ethyl group at the 4 position. That gives us 2CE.
The dose range is still low, 10 to 35 milligrams, but look at the duration, 8 to 12 hours. We've just added one carbon atom compared to 2CD, and the experience gets significantly longer.
The source classifies 2CE strictly as a psychedelicum and warns that it's often more complex, intense, and psychologically challenging than 2CB.
Why the jump in psychological difficulty?
The increased duration and the specific lipophilicity from the ethyl group likely allow it to bind more persistently or metabolize even slower. The anecdotal report for a 25 milligram experience is, well, it's stark. The user described it as a terrifying experience, labeling it Schweinegift, or pig poison.
Wow.
Yes. They reported losing the ability to distinguish reality, feeling overwhelmed, like a surfboard surfer in a chaotic sea of sound and light. It's a powerful demonstration of how a seemingly minor tweak to the structure can transform a manageable psychedelic into an overwhelming, difficult experience that lasts half a day.
And finally in this series, 2CT7. This one has a complex propylthio group attached. The dose is 10 to 30 milligrams, and the duration is long, 8 to 15 hours. The source specifically notes the exceptionally slow onset.
That slow, staged onset, often taking 2 hours to fully ramp up, is a direct reflection of its complex side chain. That bulky group likely makes the molecule very resistant to being metabolized, prolonging its half-life and giving it a long, gradual curve of effect.
And anecdotally,
Known for strong physical sensations and vivid rhythmic visuals. A 14 milligram report confirmed the slow escalation, but noted the end experience was characterized by feeling light, highly communicative, and seeing these beautiful rhythmic geometric forms superimposing and moving over objects.
Okay, let's pivot now to the entactogen family, defined by that 3-methylphosphor-methylanidaoxy substitution. This fundamentally shifts the action from 5-HT2A agonism to monoamine release.
We start with MDA, the parent compound. Doses are 80 to 150 milligrams, and the duration is long, 8 to 12 hours. It's classified as an entactogen that can easily become a psychedelicum at higher doses.
How does it differ from MDMA?
Pharmacologically, it releases serotonin, but the action is rougher. It causes a stronger release of dopamine and norepinephrine than MDMA does, which contributes to more stimulation and a less gentle emotional experience.
Sure.
The source describes it as having a harsher or rougher state and less of the magic feeling.
And a 100 milligram report highlighted this intensity. The user described floating above the floor, followed by an overwhelming experience, seeing geometric patterns, and suffering from tunnel vision. It really confirms that potential for intense visual alteration.
Now we get to MDMA, ecstasy, or atom. It's the quintessential entactogen, and it's defined by the addition of a methyl group to the nitrogen atom, the N-methyl group. This small addition makes all the difference. Dose is 80 to 150 milligrams, but the duration is much shorter, 4 to 6 hours.
That N-methyl group is the key. It's the structural modification that dampens the psychedelic intensity and focuses the action almost entirely on the emotional landscape. Euphoria, empathy, relaxation, communicative flow.
And that specific mechanism, the strong serotonin release combined with the N-methyl group moderating stimulation, is what's linked to that critical oxytocin release. The source notes its strong therapeutic relevance, especially in PTSD and anxiety. The anecdotal report for a 150 milligram experience highlighted profound feelings of universal peace, spiritual enlightenment, and effortlessly clear, flowing conversation. That's the empathogen profile.
And briefly, MDEA, or Eve, This replaced the methyl group on the nitrogen with an ethyl group.
Yes, the N-ethyl group. The dose is higher, 100 to 200 milligrams, and the duration is even shorter, just 3 to 5 hours. MDEA really shows the limits of modifying that nitrogen atom.
Yeah.
The effects are comparable to MDMA, but just less intense, shorter. It's described as more cooling and reserved.
A 180 milligram report lines up with that perfectly. It detailed a pleasant, easygoing experience focused on relaxed conversation and inner peace, but the user explicitly noted it was much less overwhelming than MDMA. It's a great example of using structure to dial down the intensity.
Okay, now we have to revisit the long-duration outliers. These are compounds where the molecular structure creates a pharmacological marathon.
Let's start with DOB. It's structurally similar to 2CB, but it's an amphetamine, which means it has an extra methyl group on the alpha carbon. This tiny addition is what completely changes its fate. Dose, tiny, 1 to 3 milligrams. Duration, an incredible 18 to 30 hours.
That alpha-methyl group makes DOB a potent inhibitor of MAO itself. It just resists being broken down. This is why its duration is so extreme. It's a hugely potent 5-HT2A agonist, known for intense ego dissolution and visual distortion.
And the source underscores that the sheer duration is the major risk factor.
Absolutely. It leads to psychological strain, panic, the feeling of being trapped. And we have to reiterate the toxicity warning. The therapeutic index is frighteningly narrow. The psychoactive dose starts around 0.05 milligrams per kilogram, but the lethal dose is estimated at only 2 milligrams per kilogram. Overdosing carries severe risk of vasoconstriction and cardiovascular failure.
And then there's DOM, or STP. Structurally, it's the 4-methyl alpha-methyl substituted PEA. Dose is 3 to 10 milligrams, duration is 14 to 20 hours. Another alpha-methylated compound.
This one is often compared favorably to LSD for its potent psychedelic qualities. But just like DOB, the duration is a major psychological burden. High doses are anecdotally reported to induce paranoia and anxiety that can persist for days.
And the report in the source?
A report of a 12-milligram experience that lasted 24 hours described overwhelming stress and psychological burdens, with the world appearing synthetic and hostile. It just highlights that extreme duration, which is a direct result of that alpha-methyl substitution, is a pharmacological choice that radically increases the potential for a very difficult, high-stakes experience.
We have to contrast these with a pure stimulant from the same family, methamphetamine.
Dose, 5 to 50 milligrams. Duration, up to 20 hours, sometimes longer. As an N-methyl alpha-methyl PEA, it's structurally designed for maximum CNS penetration and maximum metabolic resistance. Its mechanism is just pure dopamine and norepinephrine release.
And the source focuses heavily on the risks.
Immensely. High doses carry immediate risks of paranoia and psychosis. And critically, the long-term data confirms neurotoxic effects. Chronic use leads to measurable, persistent changes in brain structure and function, visible on PD scans years after someone stops using. The structure allows for profound and sustained stimulation, but the cost to the brain is measurable and long-lasting.
Okay, to finish, let's circle back to the natural entheogen mescaline. It's a 3-boson-4,4-upyl-5-trimethoxy PEA. It's not substituted on the alpha carbon, which makes it less resistant to MAO, and this is why the dose is so high. 200 to 400 milligrams, duration is 10 to 12 hours.
Because it lacks that metabolic protection of the alpha-methyl group, you just need a lot of it to overcome the initial MAO breakdown in the gut. And the experience starts differently. Users report initial nausea and vomiting that can last an hour before the psychological effects even begin.
And the psychological onset is slow, right?
Very slow, 1.5 to 2 hours. But once it's established, the effect is characterized by intense sensory enhancement, profound visual distortion, and a heavy emphasis on warmth, emotional connection, and spiritual reflection. It really fits that entheogenic classification.
There's a report in the source for a 420 milligram experience.
There is. It lasted 14 hours and emphasized the spiritual and meditative aspects. The user felt like they could see a world of the spirit and meditation, coupled with powerful feelings of warmth and energy. It shows that the 3,4,5-trimethoxy pattern, despite being metabolically weaker than its synthetic cousins, delivers a unique and profoundly introspective psychedelic state.
So we have traveled from these sterile classification systems and the confusing world of stereochemistry right into the intense personal reality of what these molecules actually do.
And the synthesis is clear. The shape of the molecule determines the shape of consciousness. We've seen how these tiny differences in N-methyl group differentiating MDMA from MDA, or that crucial alpha-methyl group in DOB extending the duration from 8 hours to 30, dictate these vast shifts in mechanism and experience.
The constant thread is just the high sensitivity of the human brain to these molecular inputs. Chemistry and biology are fundamentally interlinked. The anecdotal reports, when you analyze them alongside the technical structures, provide the empirical evidence for the science.
Hmm.
Within just the phenethylamine family, the resulting psychological profile can vary dramatically in intensity, tone, and, most critically, in duration.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the source is contemporary enough to acknowledge the growing body of research exploring the therapeutic potential of entactogens like MDMA and classical psychedelics for conditions like PTSD. The goal of this research is highly targeted, to provide a profound breakthrough psychological insight.
Right.
However, if we look back at the extreme potency and excessive duration of compounds like DOB or 2CT7, where the experience lasts far longer than any reasonable therapy session, this raises a really important question for future drug development. What structural changes, what next generation of molecular finesse will allow chemists to create therapeutic psychoactive medicines that can deliver that profound psychological insight, but within a safe, time-limited window, minimizing the immense time and physical burden that's documented in these reports?
It demands an exquisite chemical control to separate the therapeutic signal from the physical strain, something to ponder as researchers continue to unlock the secrets held within that PEA backbone. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into psychedelic chemistry.